That cold, quiet whisper you hear in the stillness of the deep woods, it's not the wind. It's the sound of a breath held for too long, the soft click of a bolt in a world made loud by war. It is the sound of the Ardennes, December 1944, and it means a sniper has found you. The quiet before the storm. December 14, 1944, the Belgian-German border. Staff Sergeant Elias Vance, a man whose hands were built for the quiet precision of a hunting rifle long before they gripped the M1903A4 Springfield, felt the cold of the Ardennes forest seeping into his bones. 2 years spent hunting whitetail in the high Rockies had unintentionally made him an expert in this new deadly game. He was a scout sniper with the 99th Infantry Division, a unit holding a quiet sector of the front, a rest cure for battle-weary Americans, and a proving ground for fresh replacements. The Schnee Eifel, Snow Eifel, was a fitting name. A thick, wet blanket of snow lay heavy on the dense spruce and fir trees, muffling the distant thunder of Allied artillery into a harmless growl. The only true sounds were the soft, rhythmic crunch of his patrol's boots on the frozen earth and the hiss of their exhaled breath clouding the twilight air. 500 yards out, Sergeant, past the old logging road, whispered Corporal McNamara, the spotter, shivering not from fear, but from the brutal cold. Mac was a map-savvy kid from Brooklyn who had learned to read terrain better than any compass. Elias lowered his binoculars, the lenses already starting to frost. "That bunker complex," he murmured, his Appalachian drawl barely audible. "They're quiet. Too quiet." They had been tracking movement, subtle shifts in the tree line that only a seasoned eye could catch, a broken twig too fresh for the natural decay, a pattern of tracks too deliberately concealed. German troops were filtering in, not in the disorganized retreat the Allied High Command spoke of, but with a terrifying, disciplined stealth. Elias's primary tool, the sniper rifle, was a piece of art and industry, the M1903A4. It was a bolt-action marvel, slow to reload, but devastatingly accurate. Its 4-power Weaver scope, though primitive by modern standards, was a window of fatal clarity in the murky forest. He carried custom-loaded match ammunition, the heavy boat-tailed bullets, carefully weighted and seated, a hack he'd learned from an old gunsmith to defeat the brutal wind and temperature shifts of the European winter. His personal mission here was simple: make the enemy fear the open road, make them hug the shadows, and most importantly, find out why they were massing in this quiet corner. The answer, when it came, would not be delivered in a tidy intelligence report, but in the thunder of 1,000 Panzer engines. December 16, 1944, 0530 hours. The barrage. The silence shattered, not with a warning shot, but with the concerted roar of 1,000 German guns. It wasn't artillery. It was a firestorm. Elias was jarred awake in his concealed roofed-over foxhole, a marvel of engineering he'd built into a rocky overhang, by the sheer physical force of the concussion. The earth heaved, trees snapped like matchsticks, the air filled with the acrid smell of high explosives, burning pine and pulverized stone. The Battle of the Bulge, the Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last desperate gamble, had begun. "Mac, status!" Elias shouted over the deafening cacophony, grabbing his rifle. "They hit the whole line, Sarge! Every battery they have!" Mac yelled back, already securing their observation post. Elias peered out through a narrow slit in his camouflage screen. The dawn was a sickly violent orange, illuminated by the continuous flashes of German heavy mortars and Nebelwerfer rockets. The Germans were executing a tactic of overwhelming shock, counting on the surprise and the destruction of American communications to blind and disorganize the defenders. His training kicked in. Snipers are the first line of defense in a rout and the last line of resistance in a breakthrough. Their unique value lay not just in kills, but in targeting the enemy's nerve centers, officers, forward observers, radio operators, and crew commanders. As the barrage began to lift, replaced by the terrifying whine of tank treads and the roar of massed voices, Elias knew the quiet hunting was over. This was now a desperate, close-quarters hack for survival in a broken, frozen landscape. The Ghost and the Hunter. December 17, 1944, Elsenborn Ridge Sector. The sheer speed of the German advance was terrifying. Elite units of the 6th Panzer Army, including the infamous SS Kampfgruppe Piper, were spearheading the assault, ripping through the thinly held American lines. The 99th, despite being a green division, was fighting with a ferocity that defied their inexperience, but they were being pushed back into the vital crossroads near Elsenborn Ridge. Elias and Mack were operating completely behind the new, fractured front line, moving as shadows in the devastated forest. Their objective was simple: harass the supply lines and eliminate high-value targets. "We got a new problem, Sarge," Mack reported, his voice tight as he scanned a troop column moving down a fire break. "They're using a counter-sniper, and he's good." They'd found the first body an hour ago, a young medic, shot clean through the neck at a phenomenal distance. Then a lieutenant, taken while giving orders. All headshots, all impossibly clean. The kills were precise, surgical, and psychologically devastating. "Distance estimate on the medic?" Elias asked, checking the wind. 380 yards up a 40-foot incline. Using the density of the air, the cold, that's a professional, Mack confirmed. They're calling him Das Gespenst, the Ghost. The Ghost. Every sniper unit on every front had a legend like him, a seemingly untouchable marksman who preyed on the fear he created. Elias knew this was more than a duel of rifles. It was a chess game of position, patience, and counter-tactics. Elias set up his new position in the crown of a colossal, half-shattered fir tree, a vantage point that offered a 360-degree field of fire, but made them vulnerable to both shrapnel and observation. Sniper's hack, the psychological kill. The Ghost wasn't just aiming for the kill, he was aiming for the mind. An enemy who believes a bullet can find them anywhere, at any time, becomes hesitant, slow, and predictable. Elias had to break that fear. He waited, 20 hours of motionless patience. He watched the German patrol movements, memorized their routes, and calculated their command structure. Then he acted. Instead of a high-value target, he aimed for a simple, stationary soldier, a Feldgendarmerie directing traffic, and he didn't shoot to kill. Elias placed his custom round through the soldier's map case, a loud metallic impact that sent a shard of shrapnel ripping through the man's hand. The resulting chaos was immediate. The German column halted, commanders rushed forward, and most importantly, the Ghost responded. A split second of movement, a glint off a magnified optic 1,000 yards away, 200 feet up in a ruined bell tower on the horizon, gave the position away. It was a fatal mistake of impatience, a reflex to protect their exposed commander. Elias didn't hesitate. He swung the M1903A4, adjusted for the incredible range and wind drift, a near impossible 1,000-yard shot with his gear, and gently squeezed the trigger. The bullet sang. The bell tower remained still, but 20 seconds later, Max saw it through the powerful scope. "Movement, Sarge. 3 men pulling something down. Looks like a rifle and, oh God, a helmet."
Elias exhaled, his lungs burning with the released tension. "A hit is as good as a kill, Mac. He won't be in that tower tomorrow. We've broken his rhythm. Now we move." The duel was joined. Elias had introduced a new variable, The American ghost was now hunting the German one. The Hack of the Fox. December 20, 1944. The crossroads of Bastogne. The offensive had stalled near the crucial transportation hub of Bastogne. The trapped 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, were holding out, but the siege was strangling them. Elias and Mac were now focused on the deep infiltration, attempting to gather intelligence and sabotage. Their new operating terrain was a network of German-controlled supply roads and field hospitals, the soft underbelly of the Panzer advance. The weather was a constant enemy. Snow, ice, and fog made movement treacherous, but also provided the best cover. Elias developed a new tactic, a sniper's hack, born of his survivalist background, the foxhole trap. He and Mac began to dig fake sniper positions near German strongpoints, not just holes in the ground, but elaborate camouflaged nests with a very specific, gruesome purpose. They used battlefield debris, bloody German uniforms, abandoned helmets, and sometimes the frozen remains of a casualty to stage an abandoned, compromised position. "Why go to all the trouble, Sarge?" Mac asked, wiping frozen mud from his scope. "Because, Mac, a sniper hates three things: being seen, being tracked, and finding an empty nest that means his prey knew he was coming," Elias explained. "The Germans will send a patrol to investigate these empty spots, and that patrol is what we're really after." Their actual position was always 300 yards away, hidden in an impossible angle, a rock crevice, a snow-covered drainage pipe, or a hollowed-out stump. When the German patrol, led by an experienced officer, approached the decoy position, their focus would be entirely on the empty foxhole. Crack. A single round from the M1903A4, not at the patrol leader, but at his radio operator. Crack. A second lightning-fast shot at the grenadier, the one carrying the most high-explosive power. The result was controlled panic. The surviving Germans, convinced they were being ambushed by a reinforced patrol, would dive for cover, firing blindly at the empty foxhole, wasting precious ammunition and time. Elias and Mac would slip away into the fog, leaving only confusion. The duel renewed. On a snow-blasted road outside of a small, frozen village, the hack backfired. Elias had targeted a logistics officer, a man in a pristine uniform who was overseeing a critical fuel transfer. The officer dropped, but Mac simultaneously shouted a warning. "Sniper! Sarge! 2 o'clock! He's using the Zildfernsrohr 42 scope. That's the Ghost's rifle." Elias had been set up in an abandoned attic, using the splintered wood as cover. He saw the flash of the enemy's muzzle, a powerful Kar 98K firing a heavy German-designed bullet. The round hit with the impact of a sledgehammer, not on Elias, but on the main structural beam of the attic, ripping through the frozen wood and sending a cascade of splintered timber and plaster dust down on him. It was a precise, calculated near miss, not a shot to kill, but a shot to disorient and flush out. Elias rolled, coughing through the dust, grabbing Mac's arm. "He's good. Too close. We're burned. Move, move." They scrambled down the rickety stairs, adrenaline dulling the bite of the cold. As they burst into the street, Elias looked back and saw him. Kurt von Stenger, the Ghost. The German sniper was a specter in a white snowsuit, perched on the roof of a half-track, his rifle still smoking. He wasn't aiming. He was watching, his expression cold and professional. He knew the foxhole trap was a fake and had tracked Elias to his secondary position. It was a moment of perfect, terrifying clarity. Two masters of the hunt, separated by 300 yards of ruined street, acknowledging the other's skill before the inevitable final shot. Elias aimed his Springfield. Von Stenger raised his Mauser. Before either could fire, a stray American Sherman tank roaring back from a patrol rounded the corner and smashed directly into the half-track, flipping it end to end in a shower of steel and sparks. The German Ghost was gone. Elias and Mac vanished into the trees. The moment The duel was interrupted, but not concluded. The final shot. December 24th, 1944, deep in the forest. Christmas Eve brought a momentary break in the fighting, not an armistice, but a surrender to the weather. The paralyzing cold was now the primary killer. Elias and Mac, running low on ammunition and food, were tasked with one final desperate mission: scouting a path for the relief column pushing toward the beleaguered 101st in Bastogne. The entire forest was a frozen labyrinth. They moved with painful slowness, navigating around massive German tank traps and fortified roadblocks. It was then they found the hack that would decide the fate of their mission. They stumbled upon a barely used, hidden German field telephone line, strung low between trees, a direct, covert line of communication for the elite forces. Following it, they found what they were looking for: the forward command post of the 6th Panzer Army, a massive, reinforced blockhouse carved into a ravine. "That's it, Mac. That's the snake's head," Elias whispered. But as they prepared to signal their discovery to their forward command, the ghost appeared again, as if conjured by the cold. Kurt von Stenger was crouched on a boulder 50 yards from the command post entrance, his rifle, the infamous Kar 98K with its specialized scope, resting on his knee. He wasn't guarding the post, he was waiting for them. He had been tracking their movement, their pattern of sabotage, and had predicted their final target. This was the end of the line. No more hacks, no more decoys, just the two of them. Von Stenger raised his rifle, aiming not at Mac, but at Elias. The German was offering a twisted kind of respect, a duel between equals. Elias settled his Springfield. His body was numb, his vision blurred by exhaustion and the cold. He had one round of his custom match ammo left. He thought of the old gunsmith's advice: the man who pulls the trigger doesn't kill the target. The man who predicts the wind does. Elias did not aim for von Stenger's center mass. He aimed for the precise point where the German scope would be, factoring in the subtle downward curve of the wind rushing through the ravine, a tiny, almost imperceptible force that would drop the heavy round just enough to hit the optic glass. In that silent, brutal instant, they fired simultaneously. Crack! Elias felt a searing, hot punch on his left shoulder, followed by the sound of splintering rock. Von Stenger's bullet had hit the edge of the boulder where Elias's head had been a second ago. But Elias's final, perfect, custom-loaded round didn't hit the rock. It struck the German scope bell, shattering the heavy glass and driving shards of metal and crystal directly into von Stenger's right eye. The German staggered back, a thick crimson bloom spreading across the white snowsuit. He fell, silent, his legendary Kar 98K tumbling onto the frozen ground.
Elias, his shoulder throbbing, knew the duel was over. "Mac!" he gasped, his voice raw. "The coordinates! Send them now!" Minutes later, the artillery rained down. The German command post was annihilated. The relief column pushed through the now disorganized panzer forces. Bastogne was saved. Elias Vance, the Appalachian hunter who became a ghost in the Ardennes, never saw the face of his counterpart again. But he knew, with a certainty that only two men locked in a deadly, personal duel can share, that the ghost of the Ardennes would trouble the American line no more. The cost of Hitler's last gamble had been paid, one cold, hard bullet at a time. The battle was won, not on a map, but in the heart of a frozen forest, by a single sniper's precise hack. The Thaw and the Thrust East. January-February 1945, the Siegfried Line. The Battle of the Bulge officially ended in late January 1945, with the German forces pushed back to their original lines. The cost was staggering, but the strategic victory belonged to the Allies. The German war machine in the West was fatally wounded. Staff Sergeant Elias Vance, nursing a bullet-grazed shoulder and suffering from severe frostbite, spent 3 weeks recovering behind the lines. His M1903A4 Springfield, now bearing the scars of the Ardennes, felt like a sacred relic. His reputation, however, was immense. The stories of the American ghost who had turned the deep woods into a shooting gallery for German officers and supply officers were whispered throughout the 99th Infantry, now grimly nicknamed the Battle Babies for their tenacious, bloody stand. He returned to his unit just as the push to break the Siegfried Line, known to the Germans as the Westwall, began. This was not the chaotic, improvisational fighting of the Ardennes. This was a deliberate, brutal assault on a vast, fixed defensive network of concrete bunkers, tank traps, dragon's teeth, and interconnected tunnels. The weather was shifting. The deep snow was melting into a slick, miserable mud, turning every foxhole into a swamp. Elias's new role was specialized and lethal. Counter-fortification sniper. He no longer hunted men in motion, but men in fixed positions. Sniper's hack, the concrete eye. The Germans were masters of defensive works. Their bunkers offered only small, high observation slits for machine gunners. Elias's strategy was simple: make the pillboxes blind and deaf. He and Mack would stalk the pillboxes for days, observing the pattern of the periscope and vision slit movement. A German observer, bored by endless waiting, would often maintain a predictable rotation. Elias would wait for the precise moment the periscope was raised or the flap opened for a hasty look. The shot was always at the narrow slit or the periscope optic. A hit on the thick-tempered glass of a periscope would explode the glass inward, blinding the observer and spraying fragments. A well-placed round through the narrow vision slit, often less than 2 inches high, would kill the machine gunner or force him to use a secondary position, silencing a key defensive weapon and causing a chain reaction of fear and paralysis within the bunker crew. On February 28, 1945, Elias executed his most famous hack of the Siegfried Line. Facing a particularly stubborn casemate, which was holding up an entire company, he observed a freshly dug ventilation pipe near the structure's base. It was a perfect, arrogant oversight by the German engineers. He calculated the angle, the distance, and the drop. He aimed his M1903A4 high, accounting for a perfect parabolic arc, and fired his custom match round. The bullet dropped directly into the pipe, ricocheted once inside the concrete chamber, and exploded an interior oil lamp, filling the small space with smoke and panic. The casemate surrendered within an hour. The line was broken. The path to the Rhine River lay open. The bridge at Remagen. March 1945. The Rhine River. The Rhine River, the historical and psychological barrier of Germany, was the next, final hurdle. Allied commanders assumed they would have to execute a massive, slow amphibious crossing, Operation Plunder, which would cost thousands of lives. Then came the miracle. On March 7, 1945, the U.S. 9th Armored Division found the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen standing intact. The Germans had failed to demolish it completely. The subsequent race to exploit the bridgehead became one of the war's most critical moments. The 99th Infantry Division was rushed south to Remagen. Elias and Mack crossed the Rhine on March 11, 1945, becoming part of the massive flow of American troops pouring into the German heartland. For Elias, this was the most dangerous environment yet. The German defenders on the East Bank were a desperate mix of experienced soldiers, demoralized replacements, and fanatic Volkssturm, militia of old men and boys. Every hill and house overlooking the bridgehead was a firing position. His primary target shifted back to artillery and anti-aircraft observers. Sniper's hack, the silent signal. The Germans were constantly shelling the bridge, trying to collapse it before the Allies could secure the eastern bank. Elias and Mack found positions on the steep, wooded bluffs overlooking the river valley. They monitored the German observers using field glasses. Instead of shooting the observers directly, Elias began to shoot the field telephone wires and antennas, connecting them to the artillery batteries. The result was a sudden, confusing loss of communication. German artillery fire became wildly inaccurate as they were forced to rely on outdated maps and preset coordinates. Then, the final, desperate retaliation came. The collapse. On March 17, 1945, the strain on the Ludendorff Bridge, combined with relentless German shelling and air attacks, proved too much. The entire structure, packed with traffic and weakened by repeated blasts, collapsed into the Rhine River. Elias was positioned on the eastern bank when it happened. The sound was a horrific, grinding scream of tearing steel and concrete. Hundreds of American engineers and soldiers died. In the subsequent chaos, Elias and Mack found themselves isolated, cut off with a small contingent in a ruined German town, surrounded by newly aggressive German patrols. This required a return to the old hunter's way, pure, silent infiltration and survival. They spent 3 days moving through the rubble, providing forward reconnaissance and eliminating enemy patrols that threatened the newly established pontoon bridges being rushed across the river. Elias's rifle was the only source of discipline in the maddening, broken cityscape. The end of the hunt. April to May 1945. The Ruhr Pocket and Bavaria. With the Rhine crossed, the final drive was unstoppable. The 99th Division participated in the final encirclement of German forces in the Ruhr Pocket, a massive trap that captured hundreds of thousands of German soldiers. The fighting was fierce but unorganized, characterized by isolated pockets of desperate resistance. Elias, now a legend within his regiment, was no longer used solely for sharpshooting. He was a special asset, used to stalk high-ranking officers attempting to flee the pocket, or to silence machine gun nests that could cause heavy casualties during the final close-quarters mopping-up operations. The final phase of the war was less about glory and more about the grim task of liberation. As the 99th pushed into Bavaria, the true horror of the Nazi regime was revealed. On May 4, 1945, the 99th Infantry Division's path led them to one of the subcamps of the Dachau concentration camp system near Mühldorf. Elias and Mack were among the first to enter the camp. The scene was indescribable. 1,500 skeletal prisoners, starved and suffering, found living under conditions of unimaginable cruelty. For the hardened soldiers who had faced the best of the German military, this was the ultimate, sickening revelation of why they had fought. Elias's M1903A4, the instrument of clean, surgical death, felt heavy and wrong in this place of slow, systematic murder. He stood guard that day, his rifle trained on the handful of captured SS guards. He didn't fire a single shot. The necessity of the fight was abstract, a defense of democracy, an end to tyranny. Now it was horrifically, brutally real. The war ended a few days later, on May 4, 1945. Elias Vance, the quiet hunter from the Rockies, had survived the last desperate gamble in the Ardennes, broken the Westwall, crossed the Rhine, and witnessed the liberation of a death camp. His sniper's hack had been a philosophy of professional precision in the face of chaos, and it was a philosophy that saw him through to the final, necessary end of the European war. He packed his custom ammunition, secured his rifle, and waited for the long voyage home.